All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get funky with it?
Always up for some funk.
This time, we're talking about Funkadelic's One Nation Under a Groove. We're talking reviews, articles, even some historical context.
It's a great album to dive into. One Nation Under a Groove is more than just an album, it's a cultural touchstone.
No doubt. And it wasn't just some niche thing either. This album exploded when it hit the scene back in '78. #1 on the Billboard Soul chart. That's huge.
Absolutely, it really captured a moment. And the reviews you sent really highlight that. I mean, you've got one calling it Funkadelic's most provocative release, and another saying it's one of the funkiest long players released in the disco era. That's a pretty powerful combination. Talk about hitting that sweet spot, right? Looking through these sources, there's this theme that keeps popping up. Genre bending. This isn't just funk, right? One review even called it a fusion of funk, rock, and dance. But here's where it gets interesting. A lot of these reviewers are saying this is some of Funkadelic's most danceable work.
Mhm.
So what were they doing differently musically on this album to create that feel?
Well, you're right to pick up on that. It's a deliberate shift in their sound. Funkadelic always had that groove, but with One Nation Under a Groove, they really leaned into it. Those rhythms, those beats, they pull you in, make you want to move.
It's like they're saying, all right, get out on the floor. It's making me want to hear it all over again.
It's definitely an album that gets under your skin.
And speaking of getting under your skin, can we talk about the title track for a second? One Nation Under a Groove? The fact that it was inspired by someone feeling that sense of unity at a movie screening outside the United Nations. I mean, come on, that's a story.
It's an incredible story, and it really speaks to what this album is all about at its core. Music as a unifying force. That idea that we can transcend our differences on the dance floor, find common ground through rhythm and groove, it's a powerful message, and clearly it resonated.
Yeah, that feeling of connection, of being a part of something bigger, it's all over this album. But you know what else is incredible? The album ended up in the National Museum of African American Music. That's not something every album achieves.
Definitely not. And it speaks to the album's legacy. It's not just music, it's a cultural artifact. They're recognizing its impact, its place in history.
And speaking of impact, did you know that a Polish musician, Kazik, actually sampled the title track? I mean, talk about crossing borders. It's amazing to see how this album from 1978 still resonates with artists across genres, across continents even. What do you think it is about One Nation Under a Groove that gives it that lasting power?
Well, that's the mark of truly great art, isn't it? It transcends time and place. And this album, it taps into something universal. That human need for connection, for release, for that feeling of unity you get when you lose yourself in the groove. That's something that speaks to people no matter what.
It really does. It's like that energy, that feeling just breaks down barriers. And speaking of breaking down barriers, one of the reviews you sent my way actually called this album a perfect introduction to George Clinton's freaky, funk-drenched alternative reality. What a description, right?
Perfect. It captures that unique Funkadelic vibe. They weren't afraid to get out there, be bold, experimental, even a little weird. But underneath it all, there's always that sense of joy, that inclusiveness. It just draws you in.
Exactly. Like, come on in, everybody's welcome in the Funkadelic world, and people really connected with that. You even sent me this one review where someone said, One Nation Under a Groove feels like the end goal for my P-Funk journey thus far. Like, this album was the culmination of something for them.
That's so interesting because it shows how music can be a journey, not just for the artist, but for the listeners, too. Funkadelic was on this creative role, pushing boundaries and refining their sound. And for that listener, it sounds like One Nation Under a Groove represents a high point.
Like, reaching the peak of a mountain and the view is incredible.
Totally.
It's amazing. But it also reminds us this album wasn't just a hit. It was a commercial success and a critical darling. That's a hard balance to strike. How do you think they managed to pull that off?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying about that broad appeal. The album has that undeniable groove that just grabs you and makes you want to move, which is obviously going to translate to the charts. But at the same time, there's a depth and complexity there that really resonated with critics. It wasn't just catchy, it was innovative.
So they were speaking to everyone at the same time. Wow. We've gone from chart positions to museum exhibits, from genre-bending sounds to this powerful message of unity. It's obvious that One Nation Under a Groove is more than just a title, it's a whole state of mind.
It really is, and I think that's what makes it so special. It makes you think, how different would the music world be if One Nation Under a Groove had never been made.
Oh, now that's a question.
Would funk have evolved in the same way? Would we be missing out on certain sounds, certain samples, even certain feelings that the album inspired?
You're blowing my mind right now. That is something to think about. It really makes you realize how much impact one album can have. Seriously, I'm sitting here imagining a whole different musical landscape.
It really makes you think. And we have to remember, One Nation Under a Groove wasn't just a standalone album. It influenced countless artists, shaped the sound of funk, and even music beyond that.
Like ripples on a pond,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Spreading out and touching everything. You know, one of the things you sent me actually mentioned that someone was at a party listening to One Nation Under a Groove, and that's when they realized they wanted to dedicate their life to music. It's amazing. That's the kind of impact this album had on people.
It's true. Music can be incredibly powerful. It moves us, inspires us. It can even change our whole path. And One Nation Under a Groove, with that energy, that message of unity, it seems to have that effect in spades.
A musical movement all its own. So let's see, we've talked about chart-topping hits, museum exhibits, genre-bending funk, and this album's incredible legacy. You really went deep on this one.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure exploring One Nation Under a Groove with you.
Me too.